Hello, welcome, and good morning. My name is Craig Wiggins, and I'm the CEO of Step Change and Safety. I'll be the host and the chair of this webinar session. And if you can hear me, can you just someone give me a thumbs up sign on your reaction button? Yeah, that seems to be people are signing up. That's great. So just a bit of background from myself. I've been with Step Change and Safety since October 2023. I've been in the industry now. I'm now in my 40th year. My background is very much about operations. I worked for Shell, BP, Petrofac, mostly in operations as an OIM, as an operations manager, and also with Aker Solutions and as their global head of HSSE. So a wide range of experience, mostly operations, but now very much trying to deliver a step change in safety with this organisation. The agenda for the webinar is as follows. We're going to have an introduction from myself. Pete Sueref from Empiricist will be giving some feedback on the survey itself. We then intend to have a discussion on the survey and a Q&A session. And we'll have a conversation with regard to next steps. What I will say is, please be aware that this is the session is being recorded, and it will be made available on the Step Change and Safety website and also the Empiricist website. Can I ask that you mute all your microphones and turn your cameras off throughout the webinar? If you have a question for the panel, could you please add it into the chat? It'll be monitored, and they will be the key questions will be asked of the panel as we go forward. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly can. If we can't answer them all, then we'll come back to this group at a later date with regard to some answers to those questions. Okay, so the key thing for me is around what is process safety, and the definition that I like to use is actually the HCMM definition of safety. And hold on just a second. And it's very much about actually ensuring that hazardous substances are kept within the pipe, and it's about a framework around how we deal with things and how do we ensure that those incidents are prevented. And in Step Change and Safety, we actually look at a major accident hazard management, which the definitions are very, very similar. But one of the things I think we need to do in the future is to really define that, because I do believe it actually does promote an element of confusion about what is process safety versus what is major accident hazard management. And that'll be a key focus of Step Change and Safety as we go forward. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panel. So Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Very nice to be here. My name is Peter Sueref. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Empiricist. We're a data science and process safety company, and my background is in data and digital throughout my career.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Paul?
Well, Craig, morning all. Paul Binnie. I'm currently one of the directors in Wood Consulting, looking after Subsea. Prior to this, I've been with Wood 3 years now. Prior to this role, I was the technical director in operations, and being a newbie in this, I've only been in the industry since 2015. I was with Apache North Sea for 6 years as optimization. In that, prior to that, I was 20 years in the British military as an engineer. So since transitioning, I've been a member of the Process Safety Committee of the Energy Institute, member of the Major Accident Hazards Task Force with OEUK, and latterly I co-chair the OITG within OEUK. If you can get any more acronyms, I'll be all up for it. So although new to the industry, I'm sort of well versed in process safety.
Thank you very much, Paul. Gillian?
Yeah, good morning. So Gillian Urquhart, so I'm the Regional HSE and Carbon Manager for BP's North Sea Operations. I've also got another hat on, which is I'm co-chair of Step Change and Safety, so working with Craig and the team representing the operators. So a bit about myself. coming up 25 years now in the workplace, and pretty much all 25 years has been in some safety related roles. So I started life doing nuclear physics. I had 11 years in the HSC where I did radiation safety, saw the regulator perspective, did some work in the offshore construction, onshore construction and major hazards as well. And for the last 7 years, I've been out the other side in Equinor and now in BP as well. So good morning.
Thanks, Gillian. Bruce?
Good morning. I'm a process engineer by background, so I'm a fellow of the Institute of Chemical Engineers. I did 24 years with BP, including 2 years offshore on ETAP. Ended up as Vice President Operations for North Africa. Then I was COO for DNO, based out in Dubai, and then Vice President of Operations for Neptune Energy. Then I've had a career change, and I now do a portfolio of things. So I'm a non-exec director with a company called Sysmax. I'm one of the directors at Scapa Energy, which is principally the engagement I've had on the principles of process safety leadership. And I'm also co-chair of the Step Change in Safety Working Group on the principles of process safety leadership. So very much looking forward to today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. And Dale?
Good morning all, Dale Checksfield. I'm an OAM with Harbour Energy, background in shipping. So I only moved into the offshore industry about 15 years ago. Subsequently have been an OAM on floating and fixed assets, a few spells in the office, including that famous COVID period where I had the pleasure of supporting what was Crystal's response to COVID then. And I'm currently a manager on a late life asset in the North Sea. I'm also the co-chair of the Site Managers Network, which is the new name for what was the OAM's network.
Thanks, Dale. I think you'll agree there's an awful lot of experience on the panel, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So just to highlight the principles of process safety leadership, there are 8 principles. They were originally defined from the Bunsfield incident in 2005. They were actually launched in the upstream business in 2019, and Step Change is a co-sponsor of the Principles of Process Safety Leadership, along with OEUK, the Health and Safety Executive, the rig owners, and IEDC. And the purpose of this survey this year was to basically allow organisations to participate and benchmark themselves with regard to the industry average and higher areas they could potentially improve. It was also to help them actually have key inputs into their process safety improvement plan. The other objective of the survey was to help Step Change in Safety plan future work scopes where we can help industry become safer. And the other part was to kind of validate and compare the results between the 2023 Process Safety Leadership Survey, which was targeted at executive leaders, and there were 73 companies and 450 leaders participated in that survey. And we wanted to see exactly what the wider workforce thought of the feedback from that survey, and were there any interesting correlations or positives that we could actually explore and understand where do we go next with these principles of process safety leadership. So with that, I'll hand over to Pete.
Thank you, Craig. Yes, so I'm going to give a 10-minute overview really of some of the main findings from the survey. I'm going to try to not repeat exactly what's in the white paper. The white paper is 40 or 50 pages long. It's okay, Craig. And we've got an awful lot of data in there, and each company that provided more than 5 responses will also have its own individual set of data. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at a few different facets of what's come out of the data today. If we go into it, Craig, then let's take a look at the first slide. So just to sort of set the scene, as Craig mentioned, the survey is really aiming at the workforce. It's based on the same set of questions that we used for the leadership last year. So we've got very similar questions that we can use as comparisons. And the way that we structured the survey was basically using those 8 principles. I've shown again here with sort of summarized descriptions for them, to have questions for each, so we could compare how each of those principles have sort of performed by the respondents against each other. We've got demographic questions. We can split up the data and look at things like role, department, or tenure. We've also broken the questions up into emotional versus empirical questions. So those things that are sort of evidence-based versus those things that are feelings-based. We can see if there's a difference. And also questions that focus on the performance and behaviours of leaders or the environment versus the performance of yourself as a part of the workforce. We throw in a few reverse coded questions in again, which just make sure people are paying attention, and we can use as a bit of a tracker. So on the next slide, we can see who's completed the survey. We had a great response. We think it's possibly the biggest service ever been carried out. There are nearly 2,000 respondents, 90 organisations. So I think there's somebody talking on the line. If we could go on mute. Thank you. Yeah, we think it's the biggest process survey that's ever been carried out. We can see that there's quite a skew towards longer tenured employees here. So if you look at how long you worked in the industry, most people that have filled the survey out are 10 years to 20, and then quite a bit 20 plus, which is interesting. And there's some interesting stuff that comes out of that later on in the survey. We had a good spread of roles. This is the sort of top list. Technicians, manager, other was a whole range of different roles that came through, supervisors and so on. On the next slide, we've also got a bit more about who filled it out. So predominantly people that worked in high hazard environments, either all the time or occasionally, filled it out, with far fewer that were office based, as you can see from the chart on the left. And then we had a huge amount of people in ops and maintenance, with good representation from quite a few other departments as well. So there's quite a good spread. We were essentially getting this out to most of the people who wanted to fill this out. You know, we wanted people in high hazard environments in these roles in these departments to fill it out. So this was positive. We know that the survey is hopefully representative. On the next slide, we can look at some of the headline figures. So we've got this year a 74% average score, which, if you compare it to last year, we had just under 77%. So there's a bit of a drop, 3% drop, which isn't that substantial, actually. We thought there'd be a drop. We were wondering if it'd be 5%, 10%, 20% even. And actually, the two sets of scores are relatively similar, which is interesting. But we will go into an area where there's quite a bit of divergence. The areas of strength were certainly around culture and engagement in the workforce. All those questions tended to score relatively positively, whereas areas to improve were around senior leader engagement, specifically when we're talking about engagement, and sharing and comms. The sharing and comms in particular was a shared theme from last year's survey. They're also scored relatively poorly. So if we dig into the data on the next slide, then we can see, if we click through, then there are some demographic differences. We can see that office-based workers tended to score more positively. There's a 5% uplift against high hazard workers. There was quite a range of departments. So finance, the highest scoring department, predominantly office-based, obviously, and then construction was the lowest scoring department with an average of 67.7%. Roles, there was a bit less variety in the specific roles. So we had the highest 77.94 for operational support, which covers things like HR, through to technician, the score just under 70%. In fact, what we saw was the biggest difference was between individual companies. So if you look at one company and another, they tended to score more differently than individual roles or departments. The highest scoring company was 83.26%. The lowest scoring company, 21% lower almost, for companies where there were more than 5 respondents. There were also some question differences. So we can see the highest scoring question: matter encouraged to stop the job if I don't feel safe. Very encouragingly, we had a 90% kind of respondent approval rate for that. And what that means is the way that the questions were structured were from strongly disagree to strongly agree. If you strongly agree, you're 100%. If you're strongly disagree, you're 0%. And then we do percentages all the way through. So this basically showed, widespread approval between agree or strongly disagree or strongly agree. Whereas I know how my organisation compares to others was 51% and very similar scores to the previous survey. The highest scoring theme was clarity. And I think the lowest scoring theme, probably not a surprise, is one more click, is sharing. Yeah, 74%. So getting into some of the people-centric views of the data, because this is about people. Each of these scores is an individual person that's taken the time to, put what they feel and give their responses. I thought it'd be useful to give a slightly different view of the data and look at some of the specific demographics. So this tree lets us dig into particular demographics across a few of the department roles, high hazard working or not, to see what individuals might think of it. So there are obviously quite a lot of different combinations we could look at. We picked high hazard working, department and role because they're fairly even spreads, and we thought it'd be quite a useful way to really understand what a particular demographic group might think. So on the next slide, we've looked at a typical survey respondents. So this is the highest group, or the kind of the most volume group. We've got technicians that work offshore in operations. We had 132 respondents. That's the single biggest kind of cohort of people that we had. They scored 66.4%. So the biggest represented group actually scored 8 or 9% below the survey average, which is interesting, I think. We can look as well at some of the comments they made and some of the themes behind their comments. So on the next slide, we can see we asked a few questions. We asked, what's your organisation do well? What's your organisation do better? And this are comments specific to that group for the typical respondent. So we've got communication, information sharing, and there are some specific comments examples there that I've included you can take a look at. Training and drills, risk management controls. Interestingly, communication is also the thing that the organisation could do better, and this is another theme that we've seen throughout. So even where respondents think that communication is done well, there's always a call for better communication. Also here, employee engagement, feedback, and training competencies. This is the sort of the typical respondent that works in that demographic. On the next slide, we've got high scoring participants. We thought, let's have a look at what the highest scoring demographic would look like. So these are people that don't work offshore, they're office based, they're in HSEQ and they're managers, and they scored an average of 80%. They're only 17, so there are far fewer of them, but still a decent number. And their main kind of areas of concern are, in terms of what's your organisation do well, they think risk assessment, hazard management, process safety leadership, integrity management, training, resource sharing. They're the things that that demographic feels relatively positive about, and that's great. We'd hope to see things like that. The culture comes through again. In terms of what they could do better, again, we've got communication engagement. That's come through pretty much every single demographic, and every way we cut it, communication engagement comes through as one of the biggest aspects. Also here, training and awareness. So again, interestingly, training is seen as a positive, but also seen as something that an organisation can do better. And the management and organisational practices, which, because it's HSEQ managers, then you'd expect there to have some of those aspects in. Finally, we thought, let's have a look at a low scoring respondent. So let's pick out the kind of lowest scoring set of respondents in the survey. And these were offshore workers in construction that were technicians. We had 11 respondents again, had a really low score, 55.56%. So to put that into perspective, that is kind of either neutral across the board or swinging some way between slightly disagree and slightly agree, but actually seem to have a bit more of a range than that. So their main concerns were, if we have a look at organisation does well, so you'll also notice that these comments are a lot smaller. There's less engagement from this set of workers, so there were far fewer comments that came through, and these are very typical. So there, there wasn't a lot there to go on in terms of what the organization do well, but communication, online rollout, monthly safety meetings came through, accident prevention, employee engagement, involvement, meetings with the workforce, but really that was sort of scratching around to pull things out. There was a bit more there for what your organization do better, and again, communication and transparency has come through, but also this employee engagement that we'll pick back up in a second. Also, this was very particular to this demographic, this workforce composition around who the contractors working in the team. So I thought that'd be an interesting view to give. There's so many stories like that we can dig through in the data, but I thought I'd give you a flavour of a few of them. I'm going to just do a final few slides. So if you go to the next slide, please. Then there are 3 visualizations that I think if you take anything away, these visualizations give you a view of the survey performance in a summary. So going back to the themes that I showed at the beginning, where we've got questions for each theme, this gives a view of each theme in terms of how it's scored on the x-axis along the bottom, and then how much consensus there was in the scoring on the y-axis. So this means that in the top right-hand corner, where we've got auditing and clarity, they scored really well. They were high scorers, but they also scored consistently well. There wasn't a lot of variety, or relatively less variety in the scoring for auditing and clarity. People tended to score similarly positively, whereas for competency and culture, although they were also positively scoring, there was quite a bit more range. So there's a bit of difference there, either between companies or demographics or individual questions. We've got sharing stuck out on its own. So not only was it quite low scoring, but it was a bit all over the place as well. It had the most variety in terms of the scoring. So if you want to see at a glance where the industry is performing well, or the perception of the industry is performing well, and where maybe we need attention, sharing certainly needs attention. And where competency and culture are looking quite positive, actually there may be areas worth digging into because there's definitely a bit more variety there. On the next slide, we've got a view of how respondents answered the survey as individuals. So each of these dots is an individual respondent. All of their responses averaged out, and again done by high score on the x-axis and the level of consensus, so the variance on the y-axis. We want everybody to be in the top right-hand corner. We want everybody to be scoring high and scoring consistently well, because that's indicative of a good, strong industry. And actually what we've seen here is an awful lot of people have scored in that top right-hand corner. By far the densest cluster is up there, so we've got good solid scores. If we go into the next slide though, Craig, this gives a view of, we've just sort of, this isn't particularly scientific, but we just color coded where we think the clusters are. So we've got this top right-hand cluster with everyone scoring well. We've then got a fair bit of spread in the middle, where we've got either lower scoring or lower consensus. There's definitely a bit of variety in the scoring there, and then there's also a bit of lower scoring. So there's something we need to push, but we feel that we can probably deal with lots of that because there's either going to be areas of strength that we can draw on, or if it's lower scoring, then maybe there's a bit of variety in the scoring. Whereas that outermost cluster in the dark blue, we've either got really low scores or basically no consensus. So almost like each question's being answered completely differently, which is probably worth digging into a bit further for those individual organizations, because that's indicative that there's maybe something a little bit more difficult to dig into. But the overall takeaway here is that actually we've got an awful lot of positivity to draw from this. And then the final visualization is by company. Oh yeah, that's the one. So this is our responses by company. So each of these circles is an individual company. The size of the circle is the number of respondents we've had for that company. And we've just shown companies where we've had more than 5 respondents here to make it a bit more balanced. And we can see the same thing again. So top right-hand corner is where we want everybody to be. And we want to push them away from the left-hand side of the screen. You can see here that we've actually got quite a big cluster in the middle. So unlike the other 2 charts I've just shown, there's not quite such a straightforward picture. We want to push everybody into the top right, but we've got quite a bit of spread, particularly on the left-hand side of the page, where we've got a variety of scores, a variety of kind of positivity and variety within the scoring. The final picture here, which is the same chart but given a slightly different slant, is a view of leadership versus workforce. So this is particular for engagement, because what we found is that engagement, in terms of leadership engagement, so the questions they're asked, is can I speak to a senior leader if I need to? Are they available? Do they engage with the workforce? There were 4 questions in the survey, and they formed 4 of the biggest differences between leadership and workforce. So we've taken that data and we've pulled out the 2023 data, which are similar questions, but also the 2024 data, and we've cut the kind of the management view from the workforce view. So you can see here that leadership predominantly scoring more positively and more consistently positively than the workforce, where we've got this cluster on the left-hand side of the screen, which shows that, you know, within companies, certainly there is a discrepancy. It's not just within departments, not just within roles or tenure, but actually company itself seems to be the biggest set of differences. So I'll just leave you with one final takeaway. We've got a few points to bring up. We've first of all got a few comments from people that filled out the survey, which were, you know, overwhelmingly positive, even if there's some things we can learn. But the industry collectively is better at culture, clarity, engagement, sharing, informing, and proactivity, certainly based on the respondents and the sentiment from the respondents. There are good scores overall. You know, this is a relatively high scoring survey, with most scores kind of in the 70% plus, but there are some substantial outliers. And finally, as that last set of slides show, the biggest differences aren't between roles or departments, but actually between individual organizations. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Hope that was really useful. Very happy to take further questions on the survey as well. So, yeah, thank you. Back over to you, Craig.
Thank you, Pete. Lots of insights, lots of information to absorb in a presentation, but I hope people have got some insight and have got some questions to the panel as we go forward. And what I would ask, if you have a question, please put it into the chat on the Teams meeting, and we'll ask those questions as we go forward. At the Offshore Safety Awards in July, there was a significant amount of questions were asked at the panel session that we had. So what we'd like to do is, we've got a few questions to start the conversation. And this one I would like to ask Bruce and the whole panel, and that is that the principles of process safety leadership are great and very welcome, but how do we assess leaders are competent in process safety leadership? Tough question.
Yes, competency is a very old chestnut in our industry, and it keeps coming up, particularly after major events. A wee story. When I took over as VP Ops at Neptune Energy, now this is several years ago, so I can talk about it, we inherited assets from the Engie acquisition, and I was worried because we were going to go from no drilling to drilling in 6 countries, 3 of them in the North Sea. And I was worried about the major accident hazard of well control. So I needed competency quickly, and I went for, in my opinion at the time, the gold standard, which I had no association or affiliation with, but it's a company called Sysmax, and we went for a competency tool that some of you in the industry will know as being CASMAXed. And you self-assess, your leadership team assesses you, they're against defined standards, and there's a frequency to it. I think from my engagements with companies, we see that type of competency works for technicians, OIMs, TAs. It's rigorous, it's time consuming, and it costs money. But the question, Craig, was leadership. So in that model, somebody assesses you, and as you go up, well, who signs off? And it becomes more nebulous. So for leadership, I think there are several ands. So yes, job descriptions with competency profiles, they're assessed every couple of years. Some companies in the basin are doing that, but not everybody. And it should be part of a plan, do, check, act cycle. It's a contact sport, leadership. So you need leadership teams holding each other to account, a fellowship against the principles. So are you doing your site audits, actually measuring it? And that builds the competency, engaging with TAs and technicians, and getting external assurance, because you don't want leadership teams to become myopic in this, and reading widely and participating in events and industry and conferences. But it's a big topic. I'd be interested to hear other members of the panel what they've got. I see Gillian's got her hand up.
Yeah, Gillian.
I was being polite in the hands. I don't know if we were doing the hands. No, just to add to that point. So I think that, or my experience is that I don't believe we give enough time on some of the softer skills in terms of process safety leadership. And what I mean by, a site manager or a production team leader, how important it is to sort of engage trust, build a culture, follow through what you're going to say. And what's really important is, how you welcome people to a site. That first engagement you have with someone is so important to generate that culture of care and to promote and recognize, speak up and stop the job. So I think for me, it's a balance of the technical and the experience. So you need to walk the talk. You need to understand hazards. You need to understand risks. You need to understand your process safety barriers, but you also need to spend and mature a lot of the softer aspects of leadership as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Gillian. Paul?
I sort of support Gillian in that softer skills. I sort of take it from a very different perspective, I think, and most of the people, never mind on that panel, but on the whole call, haven't come through the military system, where out of my 20 years in the military, I'd say I spent probably 2 years pure leadership training and then looking after people in pretty high hazard environments, and it's quite dynamic. And although we talk process safety leadership, I think it's just downright good leadership, and it's about people, and it's about understanding people, sharing values, and sharing a belief. And that belief, I think, in our industry needs to be centered on process safety. So one, I think things like Spid Adam is the training, and it's raising the awareness. And I think it's beholden to us, and sort of linking in with what Bruce says, is we do it as a collegiate delivery. So we hold each other to account. There's no framework there. You're right. We've got a whole lot of frameworks that's sitting offshore for our tradespeople, and our discipline people onshore, the designers and engineers, but we've got nothing to show for leadership. Therefore, I think it has to be, until something comes along, it has to be that holding each other to account and being honest. And sort of, there's an old adage that sort of, what isn't leadership's based on integrity, and integrity is doing something that is right, even though no one's looking. And it's holding ourselves to account, and that as an industry. And that's not the HSE that's going to do that. That's internally to us.
Yep.
So
thanks, Paul. Dale, from a frontline OIM perspective.
I think there's a really interesting point we talked around there, is about that authenticity and your own values. And perhaps one of the biggest things to do as a site manager, we all have our own style that we like to lead in. And the important thing actually is to verify with your workforce that the methodology that you're trying to deliver leadership is what you're actually landing. So one of the most powerful tools that I've seen used across the industry is the 360 feedback piece, the genuine feedback, where you ask your reports or your reports to comment on how you are delivering that process safety leadership, because I have a vision of what I would like to deliver, but does that really land with my troops? When we look at some of the data that we see out of this report, and it particularly struck me that that last graphic of where leaders think that they're delivering versus where the workforce are delivering, is what I'm saying and doing really translating into effect at the front line? Open question.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. And Bruce, got your hand up?
Yeah, spot on. I just want to re-emphasize the "and" point, that we have to have some competency on how to do an isolation audit, on how to talk about SECI backlog, on how to have a technical conversation with a maintenance technician who's doing something for a barrier. And so, yes, the engagement, and I love the 360 point, by the way. I think that's a brilliant addition. But there is an expectation in the principles to be technically competent to talk about your risks and barriers in a granular level, to understand the discharge pipework on that compressor and what the issues are. And that's where I think we're lacking, to Paul's point, where we need some skills to come and do visits with credibility.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, certainly an interesting conversation there, and certainly the technical competence to understand the risks, but then the soft skills that you require to inquire and ask questions. And really, there isn't a kind of standardized way of doing that, and maybe that's something we should talk about in the future as we go forward. So thank you very much. So the next question was actually, I'm really pleased to see that Ashley Hines has picked up on this question as well, and it was one that was picked up at the Offshore Safety Awards. And that was that in the survey, the assurance processes are perceived as a strength. But we keep on hearing from the health and safety executive that there are real areas of concern in this area. What are your thoughts, Gillian?
So, yeah, a tricky one. So having sat on both sides of the fence, so, having been an HSE myself, I used to ask the same question, why are HSE finding all these areas of improvement in your safety management systems and you're not finding these yourself? So I kind of, Ashley's comment in the chat is, that really resonates me with my time in HSE. I do believe that we're not there yet. And Ashley makes a good point that, generally, are we actually carrying out audit and assurance in the right areas? Are we really testing the effectiveness of the prevent, the detect, the mitigate, and the response barriers? And in terms of scheduling and frequencies for doing audits, I don't think we've got the balance right either. So, you could establish an audit and assurance team that are full of 30 highly competent, with lots of operational experience. But the problem with audit and assurance is, you're auditing the front line, you're auditing the engineering teams that have got a very busy day job to do. So to me, we need to do a bit of work to strike the balance, to sample, do the right sample. Is that giving us what we need? Is that demonstrating that what we have is robust, or is it identifying weak signals? So I don't think we've got the balance right there in terms of the frequencies and how we carry out the assurance as well. And just on the last point, to me, audit and assurance, it's a key component of the safety management system. It's one of the 8 principles of process safety leadership, but do we actually give it the visibility and attention it needs? So my challenge to all of you on the call is, look at your safety-related key performance indicators. Is there any audit and assurance KPIs that come out? Does your senior leaders know about how are you getting on in audit and assurance? And, is there a feedback loop back into the senior leadership team and back down again? So that's the challenge to all of you on the call. So I'd say room for improvement. I don't think we've got it right. So open for any other reflections from the panel.
Thanks, Gillian. Any other reflections, panel?
Sure. The engagements that we've been doing at Scapa with about 11 different companies, the 5th biggest gap is learning from incidents and audits. So companies will tell you their audit arrangements, tier 1, 2, and 3, maybe 4 tiers, your site-based audits, your functional audits, your corporate audits. But ask a leadership team what you're learning from it, or what are the trends. It gets a bit more difficult. And are senior leaders being given those trends? Is the analysis being done? No. And then a regulator is starting to ask in their engagements, they ask you already, what are your top process safety risks? We all know that question, but a new question that they've started asking is, what are your top actions in your action tracking system that have come from incidents and audits? And that draws a lot of blank faces. So I think it's a reflection of this survey that the audit structure is there, but learning from it, and by learning I mean actually changing something in your management system, to Gillian's point, is a gap for us.
Yeah, thanks. Any other reflections? Dale?
Yeah, I think that the one for me, and I'll link it back to the leadership piece as well, is the risk that we have as leaders of celebrating green light auditing. So we get an audit that lands on our desk that people have done, and we high five ourselves figuratively because it's been a good audit and we've not found much wrong. And we then build a culture of kind of positive affirmation that a good audit is one that hasn't found anything. It's down to us as leaders, both at site level and onshore, to actually celebrate the audits that do find issues, because they're freebies. They allow us to learn, they allow us to build effective strategies to mitigate our risk. And it's very much down to that fundamental process safety leadership of recognizing that not everything in our house is going to be right, but the deeper we look for it, the earlier we find it, the better we can address it.
Thanks, Dale. And Paul?
I'm going to be pretty controversial here. I'm going to just sort of drop this in, is the fact that how involved are leadership in audit, and what are the things that gets dropped when time is tight, production needs upping, and money is scarce? What goes? Training and assurance. So if you don't invest in it, you don't get it.
Very good point.
I'm happy to take a kicking on that, but my experience is, and I'm new to the industry, I'd never done an audit in my life until I came into this industry. Been audited a few times, but I went into an operator, picked up what was there as an assurance regime, and within 3 years, and sort of I hope Ash will back me up on this one, I think I did quite a good job and was recognised as sort of industry best practice. That's after 3 years in an industry that's grown 40 years. Doesn't that speak volumes as to how serious we are about audit and assurance? Then sat on the task group for audit and assurance, and it took us 3 meetings to agree what audit was and what assurance was. Actually, Gillian, we didn't actually agree that.
Yeah.
So I think we need to start, if we actually want to improve, we need to be serious about it. And I know people are working hard, really hard in this area, but unless the tiers above are engaged and it becomes a real issue, and I mean real issue as in sat at the board level, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
I'm pretty passionate about this, and really what drives me.
No, Paul, I totally agree with you. And I think to have a quality assurance and audit process, you need to dedicate the time to it and be involved in it. And also the fact that, do we actually give the people who do the work enough time to assure their own work as well? Because that's where you really want to stop the defects from actually escalating into bigger things. So I think the key message is it's an interesting piece of data, and maybe has got that bit of rose-coloured spectacles in there. Are we really as good as we think we are with regard to assurance and audit? So thanks for the comments there. So one of the other things, obviously, that's really important is about how we show up as leaders. So leadership site visits are incredibly important. How often can the leader talk to the team, and how does a leadership visit look like from panel's experience? So Dale, what does a good leadership visit look like from an OIM's perspective?
I think, certainly from an OIM's perspective, for those of us who've worked offshore, we'll recognise the scenario of the OIM says, right, folks, the senior leaders are coming tomorrow, and we'll have a town hall at 9:30, and everybody walks into the mess room and stands there listening to a leader presenting for 30 minutes, and the question comes at the end, anybody got any questions? And cue the silence that then descends before somebody asks something about the price of cigarettes, or whether we're going to do X, Y, or Z, or what the new crew change routine is. By far, the best leadership visits that I've seen are the ones that are genuinely, and I use it in inverted terms, unscripted. So perhaps the best manifestation of a leadership visit I had as a senior leader who visited one of my assets, walked straight past my office, didn't even stop in to see me, because they weren't there to see me as a manager, they were there to see the troops. They went straight down into the workforce offices, down into the tea shacks, and spent the 3 days of their leadership visit talking to the troops at their workplace, talking to them in small groups about their challenges, their issues, and recognize that some leaders that will come unnaturally, but the power that is attained from that kind of approach from a workforce perspective is significant. You get to then genuinely understand the frontline issues, you get general feedback, and you can actually get really succinct and tailored messaging down into the front line and use those people that you're speaking to as conduits to spread that message further. There's some really helpful guidance in the Boots on for Safety leaflet, which is available on the Step Change website for members. And there's a great bit, and I'll read the quote in there. The style of and format of a visit should be informal, and leaders need to be able to engage with the workforce in their work area. And I think for me, that's absolutely critical. Don't make everybody come to you and have it as some kind of leadership procession. Be authentic, be connected, be collaborative, where those people that are controlling and managing our risk are doing their day-to-day business.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you very much. And Gillian, obviously from a senior onshore leader's perspective, with a large portfolio of assets, what do you think makes a good leadership visit?
Yes, I really resonate with what Dale said there. So for myself, I like to go out and spend at least 1 to 2 nights and dedicate time in your diary. So everything else that you've got in your calendar, just get rid of it. You're there to focus on the visit. So it's quite easy to go sneak into an office and do a Teams call about A, B, C, D. But no, just dedicate the time and just be visible and present during your visit. And I think Dale's right. For me, it's you want to have connection. So you want to engage with the teams. So I do what Dale does. I don't go and see the OIM to begin with. I'll always go into sort of the maintenance team leader, the production team leader, find out what's going on and just take the visit from there. I spend a lot of time outside. So the last visit I was on, I actually spent the whole morning with a production technician. I said, can I just come with you and just see what you do? And it was absolutely fantastic. We looked at weeps and seeps. We looked at some of the isolations that we're on. We did a variety of work, and just having that connection and that engagement and just listening. What can I do to help you make your work safer? You get some really good ideas and solutions that come out of it as well. And just to tie in, having the connection, you've got to show genuine care. It's all about caring for people and caring for teams. So sitting down with different people in the galley for lunch, going for a coffee with someone, just being visible and being present, I think works wonders. So yeah, and trying, and I really like the boots on for safety stuff as well. So I'll stop there. I could go on in this one, Craig.
Thanks, Gillian and Dale. I mean, really what I'm hearing here is it's about the soft skills. It's about being human. It's about asking questions. It's about being open and showing humility that you don't know everything. I think that's, you're here to find out, and what's important for you to do. What do you do to make it safer on the installation? So Bruce has got his hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, again, there's layers and layers to this, and we're all passionate. I think I would add to what Dale said to say, if I was coming to visit you, yes, informal, but I have to come with an agenda, and that should be risk-based. So I should say to you, Dale, you've got a risk register on your asset. You're worried about SERPs or isolations. I'm going to come and visit in 2 weeks' time. As Gillian says, I've cleared 2 days, but my focus will be on that. And I will feed back to the leadership team. And I expect my boss, the CEO, to ask me, what have you learned from your site visits? What are we seeing? What are the trends? What are the bigger patterns? And get people targeted with an agenda.
Yeah, bit of structure as well, Bruce. I agree with that. Dale?
Yeah, and I think you're entirely right, and that's why I use the inverted commas of the unscripted piece, because that comes down to the leadership theatre. It's how we spend that time in advance preparing and collaboratively preparing that visit to make sure that senior leaders' time is valuable. It needs to be used effectively, but it needs to have that right presentation to the front line that enables them to feel like they are the purpose of the visit and they are important within the visit, rather than an enabler directly to just ticking a box. So you're entirely right. I did just want to before we move on, if we are around the that piece of the soft skills, it links back to what we were saying before around the competence of leaders. How much time and energy as an industry do we actually spend on investing in the soft skills? Because like some of the other members of the panel, I've been fortunate through my career to have specific training and coaching on soft skills, on leadership development, on management, and I must say 0 of that has been in the offshore industry.
Yeah. Thank you, Dale. Thank you very much. So I think we could talk about that for some time, actually, because it's a key tool that will drive the outcome of our process safety performance. So one of the other things, back to sharing and learning, what we know that the health and safety executive see lots of good practice, not just within the energy sector, but in other sectors. And how do you think that the regulator could be more open and share what they are seeing across the industry ahead of their inspections and get it right rather than wait till after the inspection? So Paul, have you got any thoughts on that?
Having been drilled regularly by my co-chair of the Operator Integrity Task Group, Scott Temple from the HSE, we shouldn't look at the HSE as part of a company's assurance and audit regime and looking at how we can continue to improve. That's not what they're there for. So that's sort of baseline, and I've been instructed to get out there, is the fact that they're not there as part of the audit and assurance regime. Companies, going back into our question earlier, should have that robust and effective audit and assurance regime. Having said that, there are forums, the Operate Integrity Task Group, the raison d'etre behind that is to get out these findings, not just from the HSE, but from operators and tier 1, tier 2s, is what are we learning? What are we seeing? So myself are across a number of operators. So we're picking up lessons all the time. And the forum for that we want to use is that Operate Integrity Task Group. The OEUK have already ran 3 or 4 sessions on process safety principles, leadership principles, where the operators actually gave the feedback from their recent inspections on process safety, and that, I think, proved really, really informative and effective, and it was that shared body of learning. So, in answer to the question, I think there probably is more that we could do with the regulator to publish, and that is something that is on the radar with Scott, and we're looking at how we can go through data crunch, the findings from hydrocarbon release and also investigation, see what we can do there to provide an informed set of data. So we're looking at how we can utilize AI in that space, but also operators and contractors, please, Operate and Tech Task Group is there, use it and abuse it. That's how we can share that forum. And I'm sure if we get more process safety principle leadership inspections by the regulator, then the UK will put more of those forums on. But I think there is more that could be done. There's more that is being done, but we can't rely on the HSE.
No, I agree, Paul. Conscious of time, but we've a final question here. I've noticed that someone has asked a question around audit, around was there any correlation between organisation that scores themselves high and those have had a PSL audit by the regulator. We don't have that piece of data just now, but what we'll do, we'll follow up on that and feed back to the people on the call. But, one of the key things that's really coming out is sharing and learning again in this year's survey. There's companies that do this extremely well, some that maybe don't. But as an industry, how do we get better at sharing lessons across the whole industry? And more importantly, we can share, but how are we really learning? So do you have any thoughts on that, Bruce?
Gosh, I think we're really good at what you might call the knee-jerk safety alerts. So hardware changes, shackles, hoses. But for process safety and operating discipline, I think the first thing I'd say is get your own house in order first. Collect and trend your own data. What we were saying a minute ago about trending from audits, incidents, near misses. Get to the right conclusions on those trends from incidents, near misses. And I put it to everybody on the call that from a corporate knowledge perspective, that part of the 8th principle, nothing is learned until your management system is updated. So if you're seeing a trend on control of work or SERPs, is it something in the planning process, the meeting the night before work is executed? And I think if companies do that level and then share what has changed and not so much what happened. So you're finding isolations aren't being checked properly, or you're finding gaps there. What did you change in your management system? And if another company changed the same thing, I would say that's learning.
Great, Bruce. Thanks. As I say, it's a big challenge and obviously a key focus of, organisations like the YTG, OEUK, it's step change in safety. So, I would say, please use the sharing and learning work groups, the process safety work groups, to really try and drive us across the industry. Dale?
I'm going to be probably slightly controversial and hope that none of the HSE inspectors that are about to visit my platform are hearing this call. But I think the regulator has a much more important role that they can and arguably should be playing as well. If you look at some of the other high hazard industries, we have aviation, rail. I know that they're transport focused, but if you look at some of how that learning and sharing methodology is delivered by the regulators in that space, the regulator is omnipresent in really helping push forward that through either mandating change or just through narrating change requirements after incidents. I know the regulator that we have in our industry does some great work, but equally, I think there's a space for them to step up to the plate and help industry in truly learning from the experience of others.
Okay, Gillian, I'm conscious of time. Would you like to make a comment?
No, just on the sharing and learning. So we've been having some good reflections on what can we do improving that. And I think my last point there is that we need to make the connection again. We need to say, sometimes you have an incident, you get a one pager, you share it round, that's sharing. But to really learn, you need to resonate and bring it back to your site. Can this happen here? If not, why not? And so on. So it's a personal connection.
Okay.
Conscious time,
exactly
Craig.
Right. Exactly right, Gillian. Thank you. So just moving on to the next steps. The next steps basically is we've got these industry forums. We've got a fantastic set of data from 2023 and 2024. There's several processes. Empiricists can offer companies a bit more of a deep dive into the data and actually give you the data so you can actually implement that in your process and safety improvement plan. From a step change in safety perspective, we obviously intend to use a lot of this to drive the output from the process safety work group and also the sharing and learning work group. Paul, Bruce, do you want to say anything on that?
I think just from my perspective, watch this space. We're going to be doing a series of mini TED Talks with some quizzes. So we've got a couple lined up, but watch this space and hopefully you find them engaging and useful. And we'd be very interested to hear what topics you want covered as we go through. But that's for later this year.
That's great, Bruce. And Paul?
So exciting. I can't even top that, damn it. OITG, we've got a number of themes running throughout the year, and we've pulled a plan for 2025. We're going to continue contractor management and understanding the process safety risks that were inherent in there, training and competency, and ever resounding theme. There's a number of others that we're working through between OITG with the UK and also in step change and safety, and really making a coordinated effort to improve that awareness and culture acceptance, process safety at the leadership level.
Great, Paul. Thanks for that. So just drawing it to a close, I just wanted to highlight that on the 24th of September, we have our Safety Rep event at Union Kirk in Aberdeen. It's sponsored by Serica. Really great to get as many safety reps there. These are the sort of events where we share and learn. The focus is about process safety, but also well-being. And then on the 25th, we'd love to see as many site managers as we can possibly get together, from OIMs to construction supervisors to plant managers to anyone who leads a high hazard operation along to this event. We've got an interesting agenda in that, and thanks to BP for sponsoring the event. So if you haven't signed up, please sign up. And what I'd like to say is thank you very much. I hope it was useful. Thank you to the panel. It has been enlightening. It has been a fantastic exercise. It's been really interesting, highlighting the leadership part and obviously the workforce element. We clearly have some information that we could utilise to drive the industry in the right way. And what I'll say is thank you very much for your time. I hope it was useful, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.